Hello, I'm Sherry Jacobs, and I'd like to welcome you to our fourth and final week of Art Heals. I hope you enjoyed the first 3 weeks. Today, we're going to discuss the topic of creativity and creative blocks. We're going to use this little bag that has this little notebook and these little objects and items in it. And I'm going to divide up into two different videos. The first video, I'd like to talk a little bit and get our project set up. And the second one will be sort of more hands-on with my camera on the table, showing you what I'm doing because we're working sort of tiny. But as an art therapist, I encounter people often, almost daily, that when I invite them into expressing themselves creatively, the first thing they say is, "Oh, I can't participate in that because I'm not creative." And I'd like to start and jump right in and explore that idea with you. So let's do an experiment. I'd like to let you know, here's the beginning of our experiment. I'd like to let you know that you are an incredibly creative person. So as I say that, and as you hear that, I'd like for you to look inward and see what's coming up in your autopilot cognitive thinking. And for many people, there's a million negative things that pop up as soon as somebody accuses them or invites them into thinking of themselves as creative beings. So the first thing I'd like you to do with your little journal, this is going to be devoted towards our creative exploration of ourselves, is I'd like you to take the first page and let's pause the video and pause your head and say, wow, what's coming up? Sherry just told me I'm creative. But the autopilot in my head said, no, I'm not. I'm not creative because, and I'm wondering if you can write down all of those because answers that you might be receiving in your head. You might do it in the form of a word bubble. You might just make a little list. And any of those negative blurts or negative thoughts, I'm not creative because oftentimes what I hear is, I didn't go to art school, I don't know how to draw, I don't know how to paint, I can only draw stick figures. Let's just capture those and then we'll come back and do one more thing with them. So I'll be waiting for you here. So once you've created that list, the next thing I'd like for you to do is to go down that list and see if you can identify the source of where some of those negative beliefs came from. They pretty much always came from an outside source. It might have been a teacher, it might have been a sibling. Sadly, it might have been an art teacher that made you feel that you weren't worthy of being creative or calling yourself a creative. It might have been a competitive friend or a frenemy. And could you take a minute or two to just give each one of those an origin? And then maybe once we have those paired up, we get to go back and look at our own creativity. So the next thing I'd like to do is to just, first of all, think of what it means to be creative and to invite you into thinking on two different levels. One is our own personal experience, that all of us as children perhaps had moments and times of intense pleasure from creating. That might have been doing something in preschool, that might have been doing something in your art class, it might have been doing something that you made. But all of us naturally make things as a form of self-expression. So I'm hoping you can think of some of those times. And I'd like to take this conversation into two different directions. One is thinking of all acts as creative acts, not just painting and drawing. But so often we walk through our days in incredibly creative work, but we sometimes don't call it that. I've had many, many conversations with people who sit at their desks all day, problem solving for large corporations or creating Excel spreadsheets. And they tried to convince me that they are not creative because creating an Excel spreadsheet might not feel like a creative act. And I always like to argue back and convince them that as human beings, many, many, many things that we do are actually quite creative. The other direction I'd like to go in with our conversation is looking at the very big picture of what it means to be a creative, human being. Up until recently, we really thought it was only Homo sapiens who were creative beings, meaning expressing themselves through some form of art, creating art just for the sake of art, or creating elaborate tools that had beauty attached to them. And as we have excavated more and more caves around the world, we found ancient cave paintings to show that early Homo sapiens made art. And most recently, we found even earlier cave paintings to show that Neanderthals actually made art as well, which is fascinating and really truly stretches out the belief that the inherent need to express ourselves creatively, and the simple truth that we are creative beings. We like to think of this part of our head and brain, our prefrontal cortex, as something that is reserved just for Homo sapiens, that we don't share with other animals in the animal kingdom. And that ability to imagine the world as it isn't, meaning that we can contemplate past, present, and future, and we can problem solve. Yes, animals can problem solve as well, but we can problem solve and execute solutions, which is inherently a creative act. So we can really stretch our definition of what creativity is. So my hope is that today, as we explore our own desire to create, to make things, we can lower that threshold for ourselves so we get to walk away saying, I am a creative person. I am creative because it's a natural activity to create. I think the pandemic, if it taught us anything, for many of us, we had an opportunity because we had time to go back to find activities that were pleasurable, if it's baking or woodworking or doing puzzles or making things around the house. It was almost a pushback to the very, very busy lives that many of us have been leading for so long. And perhaps many of you found that source of pleasure of doing something that's a little bit different than what you might have been doing in your very busy lives. So my hope is that we can create a little amulet to sort of capture some of the creative things that might have gotten suppressed or quieted down from the negative noise in our head. My hope is that we can stretch the topic and theme of creativity so that you can recognize yourself as acts that don't necessarily look creative actually are. And I'd also like to stretch that definition of who gets to be creative and how long humans and early humans have engaged in the creative process. So lots of topics to discuss. I have many ideas and books I will share with you and links if you're interested, and many ways if this isn't enough time to help you get through your creative blocks. There are many, many books and ideas and videos out there to help you. So I'll pause this video. Please join me for the second video and we'll jump right in, okay?